Well, thank you very much indeed. I thought, because I spend quite a lot of my time in the interiors, I might just introduce myself a little bit to you all and explain a little bit about what I do before I talk about Hastings as a specific project. So the first thing to tell you is that I'm an optimist. And I think actually most architects and designers are, because when you spend your life passionately involved in making and drawing buildings and thinking about the built environment, and when you ever do get to practice, you'll realize that probably about 10% of what you think and do actually gets built, then you'll understand why it's so important that you need to have proper dreams, you need to have a vision, but you need to not be weighed down by things that don't happen, and you need to find opportunities in sometimes adversity. So for me, I think as architects and designers, reimagining our built environment is one of the greatest opportunities we have to move resolutely towards a better future and to put a healthier, more compassionate and greener philosophy in place. We absolutely have to think about doing this. I've been really lucky to have been involved in every scale of the UK's construction industry. So in March of 2015, I was appointed by the Secretary of State for Transport to chair an independent design panel for the High Speed 2 railway network. So High Speed 2 is the biggest infrastructure project this country has ever undertaken. And it is, at the time, devoid of real design and architectural input. So to their credit, HS2 asked the great and the good from the industry to help them understand what being a good client is. It's all very well us all learning and doing great architecture, studying to be architects and designers, but it doesn't matter if it's kind of meaningless unless we have super great clients with really, really tight and clear briefs and a really, really clear vision. So I chair a panel of 40 people, and those 40 people are there to help and assist and mentor and critique in the same way that you put your work up and people like me come around and go, oh no, I don't think that's very good, or I think that's absolutely fantastic. HS2 do exactly the same thing, but those 40 people are made up of not just architects and engineers, but landscape architects, they're made up of interior designers, they're made up of industrial designers, furniture designers, artists, curators, an extraordinary mix of people. The one thing that joins them all together, that they all have in common, is that they are the absolute experts in their chosen field. So for 2 years, we've helped HS2, we've acted as a critical friend, and we have helped them think about how to put together a proper brief and a proper set of proposals for this railway and transport system. So we're not just talking about the stations, we're talking about the landscape, we're talking about the website, we're talking about the ticketing, we're talking about the customer experience, a huge and incredible array of opportunities for the design industry, for designers and architects to get involved in things that you never, ever would consider getting involved in. And the importance of the creative industries assisting and helping big, not just government, but big projects is absolutely something we have to be thinking about for the future, because we cannot allow our built environment to be designed by economists and, with all due respect, politicians. In October of the same year, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, as then Mr. Osborne, set up the formation of the UK's first National Infrastructure Commission. And the Commission's remit was to look at the UK's future needs for nationally significant infrastructure to help maintain the UK's competitiveness among the G20 nations by taking a long-term approach to investment decisions facing the country. So trying to take out the decisions about our major infrastructure and our built environment outside of the political arena, because politicians tend to make short-term decisions, not long-term decisions. So I think you might see that there's a bit of a theme here in terms of the fact that I don't just run a practice, but I also try really hard to make sure that the big, the thing that I'm really passionate about and the thing that I really believe in, which is good design can save the world. And I know that sounds a bit trite, but I absolutely believe that we have to, as creative people, involve ourselves in the absolute earliest stage of policy in government and in that kind of future thinking. And, I think that government is listening. And one of the most exciting things, I think, for me was that the Mayor, Sadiq Khan, has recently launched his Good Growth by Design. So he genuinely believes that London and that our built environment within London will be affected for the better if he has creative people advising and helping him. So he has 50 design advocates. And I say design advocates, I don't say architecture advocates, I say design advocates. And he uses them in various different ways, but similar to HS2, to mental help and give him the opportunity to think outside the box. What are we good at? We're good at lateral thinking. We're good at coming in with a different perspective. We're good at seeing opportunities and also problems and making sure that we try to address them before they happen. And so if there's anything that I leave behind me when I speak to all these people, it is that good design doesn't cost money. It isn't an add-on, it's inherent, and it has to be built within the DNA of a project. And if you design something properly from the outset, it's most often than not only better in terms of the way that we interact with it, the way it sits within its environment, but it doesn't cost money because people aren't redoing things over and over again. So what can I offer? I often wonder when I'm sat with all these highfalutin people, what is it that I can bring to that conversation? And I think actually my design education, I started, I'm an interior designer. I understand, I'm intrigued by how people react with buildings and place. And I think as a designer in these particular places and spaces, I can offer an alternative human perspective to that of GVA, one that connects. Go on, you can turn it off. One that connects the vision and the economic arguments to the people and places on the ground. And when I founded dRMM Architects with Alex DeRuyker and Philip Marsh, we set out to create architecture that's both innovative, high quality and socially useful, and bound by an aspiration to make things better. We did this. Oh, it's not. Why does that never work for me? Oh, thank you. We did this at the same time as making joyful buildings, from houses that move in order to regulate heat, light, and views. The consequences of which surprise and delight. A school turned around from special measures to the best performing school in the borough. Why? Because we chose not to knock it down, but to rebuild it with new and groundbreaking materials. And, I think we've heard about this before, but this was the first ever variable skin roof in the world, and it was in a state school in Dulwich. We had Richard Rogers, Norman Foster slipping round to have a quick look at this. And this was 20 years ago. So it's about believing. Sometimes it's about believing in a building. It's about saying it's better to keep it for lots of different reasons than knocking it down and starting again. And I think that interest in materiality, that interest in finding things that aren't necessarily new, as in they're reappropriated, if you like, was something that we started upon when we were very young in practice. And our work, I think this was our first major project. Our work ever since then has embodied those sorts of that sort of thinking. So Kingsdale School Sports Hall, the first use of cross-laminated timber in the UK at the time. So we didn't do a breeze block sports building. We spent a huge amount of time and energy to convince the client that actually it wouldn't cost more. It wouldn't cost more to build this in timber. It wouldn't cost more to have the most extraordinarily beautiful interior space that you can, it even smells good. I mean, can you imagine how hideous a boys' school sports hall smells like? Trust me, this smells really good. And you can just see how uplifting it is. And I think when you have a school which isn't used to, you have pupils, most of which were who would only come in to eat their free school meals and then go home again, who didn't believe that anybody took them seriously, who didn't think anybody cared about them. One of them described this as a cathedral, and for me, that says it's a lesson in the art of the possible. So from schools to housing, and I think, again, at dRMM we believe that as architects and designers we have the opportunity to meet some of the most social pressing issues of our time. Take the current housing shortage and the overpopulation that will increasingly become a feature of our 21st century lives. As a country, we need to accept that in order to meet the challenges of an increasing population, densification will be required by building higher and more compactly. We can and should help educate and convince existing communities that densification doesn't have to mean compromise or loss of public space or amenity. Done well, schemes can add to the local environment with good public realm and better shared outdoor spaces. Improvements in housing stock through clever use of space, light, dual and triple aspect can offer a much better quality of life within our homes. It's up to us to try to think and push and make sure that we, however and whatever we do, we are consistently and continuing to improve people's lives by the architecture that we build. And we believe it's not just about the building, but about the experience of using it. This is our recent Maggis Centre, and it's all about creating an environment of peace and calm. One of tranquility, a domestic setting in which sickness and medicine is lost to a focus of well-being and sometimes acceptance. A conversation between landscape and building, and a place to gather strength and celebrate being alive for however long that might be. We've always worked not just as architects, but as orchestrators, helping to consult on needs, define a brief, create a vision, and then help communities or clients to achieve often what seems like an impossible dream. And as you know, we won the Sterling Prize a few weeks ago, the Oscars for Architects, for Hastings Pier. This is the moment we heard we'd won it. I sent that round to a load of politicians and they said, "Ooh, you look like you had fun in that club." And I'm like, no, it wasn't a club. It was... Anyway, so I think that we held a party. Normally when you think you might win one of these prizes, you go to a big dinner, with everybody in black tie. And we decided that, in fact, we wouldn't do that. We would hold a party for the whole of Hastings at the pier. So apart from completely bankrupting us, we had the absolute best night of our lives, because it was on Halloween, and everybody there was dressed up, including my mother and my daughters. And I had some fangs in. I thought, okay, what happens if we win? I can't be dressed as some kind of ghoul. So I thought I'd go sophisticated, in sort of, nice black dress with some fangs. And I completely forgot when they interviewed me on breakfast, on 10 o'clock news, that I was lisping, and I couldn't work out why, because I was completely drunk and I had my fangs still in. But just suffices to say, it was an absolutely incredible experience, but mainly because we were sharing it with the people that helped us achieve it. So this is what you've been waiting for. So the pier, I think, feels like a culmination of a principle dRMM have stuck to throughout, to prioritise environment and people when making places, rather than our own architectural desires. The principle developed from a deeply held belief in the ability of good design to transform and inspire people's lives, not just through aesthetics, but by the equally important ability to solve problems. So this is a story about the people of Hastings overcoming great adversity to save a much-loved piece of their local heritage, and the architecture practice who used their skill, passion, and dedication to help them do it. The pier is an example of brilliant Victorian engineering by the celebrated engineer Eugenius Birch. As you can see, the image on the left shows the pier in its original state, and on the right, an example of it becoming increasingly occupied by secondary structures. It's just full of stuff. From its Victorian heyday, the pier has gone through different cycles of popularity and decline. It had its third renaissance in the 60s and 70s, and it hosted some of the most notable acts from that period, including Pink Floyd, the Rolling Stones, and Jimi Hendrix. Probably none of you have actually heard of them. Maybe a few at the back have. However, the pier was in decline from the 80s and had fallen into disrepair through lack of maintenance and investment by the offshore owner. The structure became at risk, in addition to being an eyesore to the centre of the town. But the community refused to give up, and this prompted a campaign from the local, all of the residents, and a charity was formed, and a competition through RIBA was launched to save and redevelop the pier. And then disaster struck. Just have a bit of wine. In late 2010, and right on the outset of the competition, we arrived to present our competition, and we could smell the burning embers of the pier. The fire devastated most of the pier's deck and buildings, gutting not just the structure, but the town's hopes for its most famous landmark. But instead of giving up, the fire galvanised the people of Hastings into a resilient, highly motivated and organised collective, led by a handful of inspired individuals. They formed the Hastings Pier and White Rock Trust and took a massive, massive risk by buying the burnt-out skeleton of the pier for £1 from the council. dRMM won the competition, and so began a 7-year collaboration. We supported the charity every step of the way. So this isn't just about being an architect, it's about having a wider role to play in the evolution of a project. We collected people's memories of the past. We produced information to explain the present condition and what needed to happen to save it. It's very difficult to explain how much time and energy and, in fact, money that is raised that needs to go to make that structure safe. We organised a party, you can see there's a theme going here, on the promenade to draw out people's desires for the future. We went to local schools to do workshops on the pier's future as a way of engaging children and, by extension, their families, and to maintain momentum for the campaign. At this time, the pier was still owned by a company registered to Panama, and despite the repeated requests by the council to repair the dangerous structure, the owner didn't respond. Through our collaboration and support of the community, we helped to coordinate and launch the crowdfunding campaign. This was the first time ever that a trust sold shares. 3,000 of them were sold to the local residents, raising £590,000 of the £14.2 million cost. The remainder came generously from the Heritage Lottery Fund. And the loan may have only been a fraction of the overall budget that was given by the community, but the local investment has given Hastings residents a real sense of ownership, earning the pier the title, the People's Pier. So then came the tricky question of how do you build a building to satisfy a client made up of 3,000 people? If you ever have a client of 3,000 people, go lie in a darkened room with a towel over your head. So we thought hard and long about that, and we came up with the answer. It turned out not to build one at all. It is almost impossible for an enclosed space to fulfill all the needs of a community with an ambitious brief and absolutely no money. So from rock concerts to circuses, community choirs to fishing, Hastings Pier has to be all things to all people. So we decided to spend most of the available money on shoring up the structure and therefore allowing anything to be placed upon it. We had to be both poetic and practical. Most of the 14 million budget went below the deck, with only 2.5 million going towards restoring the old pavilion and building the new visitor centre. But by servicing it with power, light and water, we helped to create an enormous, free, public platform over the sea. Accessible and sustainable, it frames a spectacular seascape and offers unlimited variations for relaxation, contemplation and play. Affectionately named the Plank by locals, the new pier has risen phoenix-like from its all-too-real ashes, thanks to local craft and ingenuity. The redesign of its completed visitors centre, clad in wooden boards from the fire, and a grand external staircase that doubles up as a performance space, a promenade to the sky. So with such a limited budget, we clearly needed to be economical. The visitor centre was placed in the weakest part on the pier because a new structure was inserted into the Victorian column grid, giving renewed stability to the entire 270-metre length of the pier structure. So we put the money where it mattered, where we needed and where we knew that we had to sustain that building. We also had to be practical and sustainable. Cross-laminated timber was chosen both for its sustainable qualities, its lightness, and how quickly it is to build with. And this was really important given the logistical difficulties of building with the tides that come in and out on the pier. Every design decision is both practical and underscores the enjoyment of the project's natural surroundings. The concertina arrangement of the visitor centre glass resists wind pressure without the need for thick window frames, retaining a clear view of the horizon. But it also doubles up as seating. The project combines both innovation and traditional crafts. We refurbished the surviving Grade 2 listed pavilion in a way which allows the new additions to be distinct but complementary. These pods at the back here transform the pavilion into a functioning cafe, restaurant space, and they're clad in timber salvaged from the old pier decking. And that allowed us to have more glass and an envelope and free plan serviced externally. Similarly, we retained the existing balustrades wherever possible. Where the pier needed new ones, we kept the rhythm of the old 1.5 metre sections. But rather than recreating the Victorian decorative approach, it has an element, a contemporary expression, which underscores the elements acting like a sundial on the deck and mimicking the rise and fall of the motion of the waves. Everything about our work on the pier enhances your enjoyment of the elements. The sky, the horizon, and the light. The sun and the sound. A local visitor was overheard saying that this was the only pier where you could actually hear the sea. And much of the painstaking restoration and new building was completed by local contractors and businesses, including the furniture, built by local organisations set up to help the unemployed get back to work. We made the new from the old. There was absolutely no waste of material. All the reclaimed wood lengths were deployed, either as cladding or, in this case, as a bench which covered up a duct. The project embodies the memory of the pier, as well as supporting its future. Here you can see the visitors' centre cladding, again using salvaged timber, and how it has been adopted by the branding of the pier. So our job as architect was to help bring together ideas and people, to analyse, to question, create and communicate a vision, one that the public can appreciate and get behind. I think this project serves as a profound signal of what can be achieved through the willingness to take risks and believe in the community. We listened and we learned from each other. We critiqued, we respected, and we enjoyed each other's opinion, and that's through good times and bad. We formed a strong and resilient group whose determination and collective spirit became a driving force in getting things done. Perhaps in an increasingly cash-strapped, risk-averse, and mistrusting society, this is something that we can all learn from. And it works for all kinds of events, from community choirs to corporate events, all necessary for the pier's economic survival. The joie de vivre of this project can't really be shown in pictures. It has an incredible spirit when you go there. It kind of oozes feeling, and I think that that's something that not all architectural projects have, and I absolutely, truly believe that's because of the kind of blood, sweat and tears and love that was put into this project by so many people and on so many different levels. So all I would say is that if you haven't gone, then do go any time that you can, because even on the most miserable of seaside days, and trust me, the British weather can really dole some really horrific days out, there's something really wonderful about this space, and there's something really freeing about the generosity of having absolutely nothing but an opportunity to stand and look at an incredible environment of sea, sun and sand. So thank you very much. That's the end of my lecture. I think I'm going to take questions if anybody has a question for me. Don't be afraid. I'll be very upset if no one does ask me a question. Oh, thank you. Tell me your name.
Seema.
Seema. Well done, Seema.
So just the point that you mentioned at the end about the weather and the climate. So how did you think about the weather, and did you think of how to deal with the weather in this kind of open space? Do you have any aspects to consider while doing this regeneration?
Well, I think, in terms of material, you have to think about the elements. So all the materials that you use have to be able to withstand, the kind of terrible, it's a very corrosive environment, the sea, and the sort of battering from waves and so forth. But we have there's space to go inside, even on the most miserable days. So you can go into the visitor centre and you can go into the new restaurant and cafe. But actually the most wonderful thing about it is that you walk out into the middle of nowhere, and you're surrounded by whatever it is, whether it's sunshine, rain, or really heavy wind or really calm day. And that's something that actually you don't want to take away. I think that there's very few places that you can experience those kind of extremes in a safe space. So that's one of its qualities, actually. So to answer your question is, no, we tried the opposite in this instance, not something you generally do, on the understanding that if you want, you can go and get a nice hot cup of tea and get out of the wind and rain.
I was just really interested in the 3,000 owners. Is it still their space and they can define how it's used?
They are part...
It's also public space of the town.
It's a public space, so it's always open, but you can close it off, but they very, very rarely do that. So when we held our party, for a short period of time, they shut down the pier just to sort of clear everybody and then make sure that that for the first 15 or 20 minutes that no one came on, and the BBC crew and all those, in case we won, were there. Generally, it's always open, and I think that the trust, even they have a board which takes the decision, but I think really the fact that you have that sense of ownership isn't necessarily about making decisions about it. I think we spent a long time asking and listening and talking to the community in loads of different ways about what they wanted. But what it does is just kind of, it means that there's a real sense of belonging. People are so passionate and proud of it because they feel that they have, they've contributed, however small financially that amount of money was. They're really proud of it, and I think that actually, I really believe, I believe very strongly that in the next sort of 10, 20 years, projects like this are going to have to be thought about in different ways, because the government has no money really and isn't investing in these kind of big regeneration, renewal projects. And so local communities have to find ways of saving these kinds of structures and bringing them back into their communities. And this is, this was groundbreaking in the sense that it had never been done before. And I think that the success of it and the opportunity, I'm not saying that, I think, even the fact that it's won the Sterling, so many people now go and, or might as well go and have a look. All of that helps regenerate an economy that, like many seaside towns, is really, struggling. So it's just a great story, I think, and however the economics of making and building and delivering these types of projects happen in the future, I think they will have to have a large amount of, funding outside of government, because it just isn't going to come. What's your name?
Krista.
Krista.
So I think you showed great in Spain in not actually populating the pier. And that's a skill in itself. I was just wondering, do you think maybe in the future it might be revisited? Do you think the structure will last well, or do people actually want to add to it as they did in the past?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's nothing. I mean, this is 8 years ago, and trust me, when you're given your first cultural project, and the client actually said, "We want, a big iconic building at the end of the pier," yes, and then you think actually that really isn't the right answer. So yes, you're right. I think editing is often, as hard as it is, a lesson in the sort of generosity of this project comes from the fact that there is nothing but free space. I think there were plans always to build, to have a sliding canopy that would be flexible and move. So all the designs that we came up with were always left space for the community to use it in different ways. So I think the reality is it'll probably stay pretty much as it is. And if in the future they have more money, they may consider building other structures on the pier, but probably I would very much doubt they'll now think about, because of the success of the project, I think they probably, I don't think they'll be building, on that end deck space.
Did you ever...
Can I have your name?
Lily.
Lily. Hello, Lily.
Did you ever present to all 3,000 people, like, the ideas that you had in the end? And if not, how did you get the ideas to them?
We had lots of different ways of, I'd call it creative collaboration rather than consultation. So we had very kind of interactive days where we'd go down, which we'd every time that we came up with a different idea, we'd have an open day, So we would invite the community to come and talk to us, and they did in very, very large numbers. And whenever you have, in order to have a successful project, regardless of how many people are involved, you do need a small core group of committed individuals who drive the project forward, and that's pretty much what we had here. So the trust has a board, and that board of six people have really ultimately become our client, and they are they're the sort of the gatherers, if you like, of what it is that the community desires, and we've helped them coordinate what that might look like. And so I wouldn't, we've had conversations and discussions with various different people at various different times. We've never presented to 3,000 people our final, the final kind of outcome. But the way in which I think that this project in particular has evolved has been so, that the involvement of the community has been so integral in the process that actually it became quite a fluid and iterative process. What's your name? Martinez. Well, the timber that we've used, interestingly, timber is much. If you have the right kind of timber, it performs much better in fire than pretty much anything else. And so, in this instance, we used a sustainable hardwood. I mean, it's a kind of mix, but in general, a sustainable hardwood from South Africa, and because it has very good fire properties. I mean, you can never, when a building gets to a certain temperature, there's not much you can do. But I think that in terms of the material and the quality of the material, and the fact that we've tried really hard to reuse and keep the memory of the existing pier, wood and timber was entirely the appropriate thing to use. And then I'll come back to you. Tom.
I was just wondering, do you think that this had been a government-funded project? Do you think there had been the consistency for it to actually come off the ground? Because obviously you work in government, and there's sort of a tendency for each party to do a different thing to contribute to us. This was an 8-year project that could be 2 separate governments. Do you think it would have happened?
That's a really good question. I think that the continuity of the community was absolutely essential in getting this project done, and when you're working with an existing structure, particularly the interior architects, designers here will know. Well, you won't know yet, but trust me. You start a project, and you start unpicking it, and suddenly there's a massive hole in the floor that no one told you about, or there's a kind of disaster that's going to cost 3 times more than it needed to. And the pier, in a sense, was you don't really know when you have such a fire, such a kind of deformed and ruined structure, exactly how much it's gonna cost. So we had throughout the process, some nasty shocks, and when you're working with a very small budget for the actual top of the pier, and most of it is going underneath. Those sorts of, you need a momentum and a passion and a sort of group of people who believe that it will happen and carry on, and you can keep fundraising if you need a bit more money, and all of those things. And that kind of commitment doesn't happen. You don't really get that kind of commitment from government, actually. I mean, the Heritage Lottery Fund is absolutely fantastic, and in a sense that's ultimately your and my money. It comes through a revenue that goes through government, but I think that the involvement of so many people and the passion of so many people and the consistency was absolutely essential to get this project through some really, really difficult times. And that kind of level of belief isn't necessarily something, you're quite right, comes from government, who are often very much more interested in, are they going to keep their seat, or are they, what is it? Can they cut the ribbon, before the next election, kind of thing? Well, no, you can't. And And so in that sense, the long-term vision and the long-term belief that this was going to happen is something I think only can come from a group of people who are going to be there in the long term, who know they're going to be living there in 10 and 20 years' time, who know that their families are going to come back and want to enjoy their, their kind of natural environment. So I think, yeah, it's really important that we don't rely on others. I mean, I'm not suggesting that's the right way things are going to happen, but I don't think we can rely on others. So we have to find ways of building and orchestrating these projects. And architects, I think, and creative people, designers, will have to increasingly be entrepreneurs and think about how they can help communities to deliver these types of projects. Because communities don't come and say, I've got £10 million for you to commission you to do a project. They say, I've got an idea, no money, can you help me make a brief, put a vision together to help us get that money? So often with these types of projects, as an architect or designer, you have to work in a really different way than the sort of classic, here's a commission, get on with it. What's your name? Clarissa. Well, I think as architects, we always, we're pragmatists, and we always try to deliver buildings that have, a kind of long-term, durable life. And as I said before, if you're building anything near the sea, it has to be of the highest quality, otherwise it just deteriorates over time. And the reason we use the existing pier as cladding is not only to not use, not to waste anything, but because that material, even though it had been burnt over those 100 years that it had been there, had managed to still, it had done its job. So I think that if you create in this case, a building clad in a material that isn't ever really going to age because it's already aged, it's already gone through that process. So there's no sort of here it is now and it's going to look different in 10 years. It's like here it is now and it looks like it did when it was a plank on the deck, 50 years ago, and now it looks the same. So the answer is yes, we always think really hard and fast, especially when we know that projects have to be done with limited resources, and in this instance have to be given over to a charity who have to earn money through the economics of running the pier in order to maintain the building. So yes, everything that we did and all the materials that we chose, we always had in mind that they had to, have some kind of long-term life and to make sure that they wouldn't degrade really quickly.
I'm Anna.
Oh, good. Well, no, thank you.
I was wondering, how would you describe the feeling that you get when you reach the end of the pier? Do you think it's different because you're just surrounded by the sea, and I suppose it's so different to the feeling that you get when you enter?
Yeah.
How would you describe it?
Well,
do you think that is the happy ending?
It's, well, apart from the fact, if you're like me, it's like the nearest thing we're going to be to our European neighbours. So all I want to do is throw myself off it and swim. But I think that there's very few places or very few open spaces that have that kind of 360 view. So when you're in a park or when you're in a free public space, it's very rare that you can do that and it's still the same thing. you don't have a different, you don't have a bit of green, or you don't have a bit of tree or anything. And that is an extraordinary sensation. And it's like being on the edge of anything, if you are like me, or compelled to throw yourself off it, which is, I don't know, I'll have to unpick that one day. But you just have to go and do it. I think it's really worth, it's really worth a visit. And I think it's probably different for everybody. Everybody has a different sensation when they experience these sorts of things, and that's what's so wonderful about it, because it allows you to have any kind of experience and feeling that you want. And that's what's so special about these types of places, and they are few and far between. No, that's fine. Thank you.